My life, especially these past few years, has been marked by incredible uncertainty, instability, and a sense of being hopelessly lost. I moved into a camper van, returned to school, became a licensed therapist, and then, within a year of achieving licensure, a whole bunch of factors forced me to take a step back, shut down my nascent practice, and critically look at what exactly I'm doing with my life, what's working, and what needs to change. I've been living on the West Coast, but typically for me was feeling my perennial urge to keep moving on, exploring and expanding. The idea of working as a conventional therapist had lost its allure, and while I was tinkering with tangentially related ideas and business plans, an optimal path forward remained elusive, and I found myself floundering, spinning my wheels in psychic mud. There's so much I love about the West Coast, the wild expansiveness of it, the moodiness of the long, dark, rainy winters, the progressive, fringy culture, and not least the fact that at this point in my life, all of my closest personal relationships are based here. As of the present, Vancouver Island has mostly been home for the past 12 years. It's never completely felt like home. I've never fully felt like I belong. But in many ways it's the best fit that I've found in my adult life. As long as I've been here, out west, I've felt this wistful nagging of nostalgia for my homeland in the Gatineau Hills of rural southwest Quebec. I never fit in at all with the more conventional culture of Eastern Canada, but I did feel a profound and enduring sense of belonging in the natural environment of that area. I love the stunning beauty of the mixed forests that vary so greatly from season to season, the abundance of wildlife, the endless lakes and rivers where I'd spend my summers canoe camping, and the characteristic smells and sounds of those woods. Part of me always longed to return to Quebec, but as I became more rooted into the West Coast, that potential seemed increasingly remote. But this past summer, as my budding career as a therapist stalled out and I became consumed by doubts about so many parts of life, I decided to move back east for a while to reconnect with old friends I'd known since high school, with family grown distant, and above all, with the land I so missed, and spent the next couple months preparing myself for this transition. I hoped to determine whether it still felt as much like home as I imagined, and whether a permanent move back would be in order. I knew that I would be revisiting relationships that were somewhat rocky and had collected a lot of dust, and I readied my inner resources, soothing the anxiety that arose as the day of departure drew nearer. However, that day hadn't even arrived when things started to fall apart. 3 days before I was set to leave for my drive across Canada, with a lot of mechanical work already completed, the transmission in the van died, and without the money to fix it immediately, or the time to wait before winter arrived, I, a bit impulsively, bought a plane ticket to Quebec. A couple more crises arose in the following days, which, individually or collectively, might have been taken as signs not to carry through with the trip, but no alternative options appeared viable in the short term, so I stuck with the plan, and soon enough October arrived, and so did my travel day. A long day of airports and planes passed with minimal fuss, and before I knew it, I was back in my homeland. I was staying with my old friends in the city, and almost immediately my misgivings began to bear fruit. As someone accustomed to off-grid rural living, being in town was a harsh adjustment, and I was distraught to find vast, beautiful tracts of countryside replaced by strip malls and box stores. In the house, I found my erstwhile friends, while similarly to me entering middle age, were still living like teenagers, partying late nearly every night, endlessly repeating the most banal and tedious rituals of hedonism you can imagine. Their humor offensive for the sake of offense, and chatter wholly devoid of substance or meaning, just empty drivel, night after night. I found myself trying unsuccessfully to sleep on a leaky air mattress in a room without a door adjoining the living room where the bulk of the partying took place, and every noise and cloud of cigarette smoke funneled straight into my room. Despite steps I took to improve my situation, it became clear that it wouldn't be sustainable for long, and I soon concluded that I'd need to return west sooner than later. And the longer I stayed, the greater the need to leave grew. But I had certain priorities to address while in Quebec, and those became my focus. First, I wanted to spend time and help out with my father, who's in the frail final years of his life. This colored the trip with a deep view of sadness and reawakened resentments, but I was determined to make the best of my time with him, and while the time was less than I hoped, I think I did. The other matter at hand was to reconnect with the hills, the forests and lakes and rivers that made up my environment in my younger years, the nature that shaped me as a person to a greater extent than any of the cultural forces I endured. This proved difficult, with my vehicle having been left behind on the west coast, and again I spent less time than I had hoped exploring my old haunts, but I mostly found ways, by transit, by foot and by thumb, to get where I wanted to go. I packed lightly, bringing a sleeping bag but no tent, and walked for many hours each day, wanting to soak in as much of the landscape and the richness of autumn as I possibly could. The nights were frigid and sleepless, and sometimes rain came, drenching me in my gear, but I was absolutely enchanted in every moment. I made my way to the tiny riverside village where I was born, and found it to be somewhat gentrified, but still small and utterly beautiful, with an unmistakably bohemian vibe. I spent a couple days in and around the village, my heart full of yearning for a permanent return to this sense of comfort, peace, and belonging I felt emanating from every stone, every crimson maple and golden oak, from the familiar old houses, shops, and the winding paths between them. There were some shocks, such as that my first school was abandoned and boarded up, and that an old farm field I used to play in on the outskirts of the village was now the site of a McDonald's and a vape shop, a discovery which sparked visceral revulsion in me. But overall, the feeling of returning home was overwhelmingly sweet, intoxicating. This feeling persisted as I hiked out of the village and deep into the woods, following endless trails into the farthest reaches of the vibrant, beckoning forest. I took pauses on rocky outcrops, drank from springs, and slept beside wide and silent lakes. I encountered wolves, beavers, otters, moles, deer, chipmunks, loons, chickadees, blue jays, and many more other creatures than I can name here. A wild abundance of life compared to the west coast forests that are often eerily silent. The contrast of the energy between the natural environments of these distant parts of Canada was palpable. There's a sometimes comforting but often oppressive darkness and heaviness in the energy of the west coast, whereas the woods of Quebec offered lightness and openness that quenched a spiritual thirst I'd been carrying around for many years without being fully aware of that craving. I found myself feeling that I was finally breathing clear air after countless seasons cloaked in a dense fog, which makes sense. Conditions deteriorated at the house where I was staying, to the point that it no longer felt safe. Certain events left me shaken and distressed, and I bumped my date of return west sooner and sooner. I did, however, manage to make it out camping again for one more night, and once again briefly visited the village of my birth. However, this time the magic felt faint and untouchable. The people I encountered seemed utterly unlike me, alien in a way that felt all too familiar, as I was confronted by memories of my youth spent feeling so intensely at odds with the tenor of society. I ached to feel the high of familiarity I had felt last time, the thrill of nostalgia satisfied, but this time I saw the village and the forest as being beautiful but regular places inhabited by regular people, and certainly not without flaws. If I did return to live there, I would be bringing all my existing adult baggage along. It felt prudent to release any illusions I may have been carrying, that returning to the land of my childhood would in some radical way free me of my existential angst and constant sense of restlessness, of not belonging. But, you know, like they say, wherever you go, there you are. And, in a way, I'm afraid to somehow corrupt the memory of my childhood by returning to where I was raised. Perhaps the past really is better left to rest. But these musings were overwhelmed by the chaos and conflict emerging at the house, and I needed to find my way back out west in a hurry. In order to repair my van, calm my nerves, regroup, and create a new plan. I abandoned the hopes that I had originally held for a spacious and conscious fall season of reconnecting with my roots, and braced myself against the storm of grief, anger, confusion, self-doubt, and disappointment that had swept over me. The situation at the house was such that I spent the entire last night before my early morning flight at the airport, just to avoid being around the people I'd once considered my friends. I spent the night in a daze, in shock at the dizzying events of the past month, and before I knew it, was flying back across Canada. I was rocked by every shade of blue there is, even as I absorbed the beauty of the vast open countryside drifting past, 30,000 feet beneath me. The endlessly lake-bejeweled shield of North Ontario, the vast river-scarred grid of the prairies, and the intricate labyrinth of stone and wood comprising the mountains of the west. I didn't know what to think, but found myself continually returning to thoughts of home. The word and the idea of home, I mean. I'm not totally sure what it means, but it must be a place of belonging, of alignment with spirit, and of vitality and purpose. But it doesn't necessarily need to be a physical place. Home can be a person, or even an idea, a song, or a story. Where do we find our ground? Where's the center of our universe? I believe that we discover this by noticing what makes us feel alive, that which is truest to our nature and resonates the loudest and most clearly through all the noise of life. I've always struggled with the tension between the desire for home, for peace and stability, and what feels like an irreconcilable drive towards expansion and exploration. I know I fall deeply in love with places, but staying in one place for extended periods of time has always felt thoroughly uncomfortable. And I find myself wondering whether I'm destined, maybe doomed, to remain a wanderer for the rest of my life. I wonder whether embracing transience and letting go of attachments to a greater extent may be the path of alignment I'm after, or whether I might be able to find some sustainable balance between these extremes. What seems wise is to focus more on nurturing a sense of home, of purpose, vitality, and belonging, within myself. The ability to be at home anywhere, knowing that as humans our deepest roots are in the pure essence of being, beyond place and time, and that the sweet embrace of the familiar and beloved is always available to us if we're sensitive to its nature, sensitive to our own nature. To be completely at home in ourselves, we need to learn to fully accept and trust ourselves, while on the other hand remaining inquisitive about ourselves and playful as if we were kids. We need to understand how to find peace and balance within ourselves, even as the vicissitudes of the world knock us around, because they always will. I think this perspective on home is the most meaningful to me. A human life is such a brief window of opportunity, and it seems crazy to me not to approach it as adventure and as art. So many lives are wasted in boredom and drudgery, and too many people don't believe that they have any power to change. Too many people feel like strangers to themselves and have given up on truly living before they've even begun. And I don't say this from a high horse. I've wasted or lost a tragic amount of my life to depression, addiction, stupidity, and self-doubt. It's a harsh realization that many of us have to navigate, and so is the fact that while our suffering may largely be the result of forces beyond our control, what we make of it and of life is pretty much entirely our own personal responsibility. A bitter pill to swallow, and at the same time it can be incredibly empowering. Having landed back on Vancouver Island and moved back into my van, my head is still reeling. I've cut ties with one of my oldest friends, and wonder whether I'll see my dad again. I probably will, but it's always a question at this age. Part of me regrets going to Quebec at all, and I remain feeling lost now that I'm back in this place I went to such effort to leave. As ever, my head is swimming with potential paths forward, but I guess if I've learned anything, it's how significant home feels, even to a restless drifter like me. I've returned to an awareness of my inner cosmology, and of being home in every atom and cell of this living world. Feeling lost, I keep asking myself where I'm going to find my sense of belonging, my fire, my home. And now the answer I keep turning to is that I am home. I am exactly where I need to be, where I belong, and I always will be. I don't fully believe this, but the deepest, most spiritually attuned part of me seems to resonate strongly with it, and it seems like a good attitude to cultivate, so there we go. Every day when I awake, welcome home, welcome home.